Now, in the culture of her day, if she was bleeding like that, she would have been a person who would have been considered unclean, someone who needed to go away from other people. In fact, there were a group of people known as the Pharisees. We meet them in Jesus' day. The word Pharisee means to set apart. And their whole idea is that they would be set apart from the dirtiness of life. And so a woman like that, who had been bleeding for 12 years, would have been shunned, scorned, set aside, put off. We don't want to be infected by her. It's interesting how the story goes. Of all the people who would seek to get away from her, there's a story where as Jesus is walking through the crowd, she comes up just to touch him. You know, often our idea is that if an unclean person touches someone who's clean, then they become what? Dirty, unclean. But what happens in that story? Jesus' cleanliness, his righteousness, works the other way, and she's healed. See, there's a sense in which Abraham has this idea too. The righteousness, their love, their mercy, their forgiveness, that's what's contagious. That's what's catching. And if this city was filled with even 10, then maybe there's hope for that city. But it's interesting here, and this raises another question, how Abraham counts down. He starts with 50, then he goes to 45, then 40, then 30, then 20, then 10, and most of us want to have him keep going, right? Well, what about 5? What about 4? What about 3? What about 2? What about 1? But Abraham, he does something, doesn't he? He stops at 10. Why does he do that? I think there's a very good reason. Abraham realizes something very important, which is this: that if righteousness is going to be contagious, it needs a community. And the number 10 is very significant because, especially in Old Testament times, it took 10 people to start a worshiping community. Like if you were going to plant a church or a place of worship, you needed 10 people. And why did you need that much? Because there's a recognition that God's righteousness is found in community, in a group of people. It actually falls right in line with what we were talking about as we opened the story of the book of Genesis. It's only when there is a community that when people look at it, they gain insight into who God is. And so when Jesus comes, he gathers around him a group of disciples. He's not interested simply in having isolated disciples. He gathers them into a community, into a church, into a body, into a people. And I think that's really, really important. You see, when God, he realizes the problem is that relationships have been broken off, his goal is to put it back together. Put people back in relationship with him, put people back in relationship with each other. And Abraham realizes if righteousness is going to be contagious, that's only going to happen when there's a community of people. Which I think this is very important, especially for us today. Because there's some of us from time to time who, because of all of our foibles and sin and difficulty, we say to ourselves, you know, I'd be a much better Christian if I was by myself. I'll be honest, I'm a pastor of a church. I sometimes think that myself. I would be a lot better off if I was by myself. That's not true. Despite all the troubles that being in a community brings, this is God's intention for us. That we be together, that we work together, so that righteousness would be contagious to those around us. You know, I want you to realize something. Christian faith is very personal, but it's never private. When the Bible's very clear about it, it's very personal, the relationship we have with God, but it's never private. It's always meant to be found in the midst of a community. We need each other. You know, if we were to try and go out there alone and change the world, and we didn't have the encouragement that came from one another, you know what would happen? We'd probably become like them. But when we're there to support each other and encourage each other and not be in a situation where you finally say, man, I'm Elijah, I'm by myself. God, just take me out because I can't get this done by myself. When we have that community of people supporting around us, it's amazing what God might do through us. You know, one of the things that we say a lot here at Sunlight Community Church is this, that this is a place to belong. And I want you to really think about that, because there are probably times where you're tempted to just say, you know what, I don't need this. You know, this kind of organized religious situation, I don't need that. I can just be off on my own. That's not true. It's really not. We need each other. And what I'd like to encourage you today, you know, it may be often that you just think of this as an event. You show up, you sing some songs, we pray, you hear the sermon, and then you go. And while there's a whole bunch of people surrounding you, you're really alone in your faith. Don't let that happen to you or to the people sitting around you. We really need to be living this life together. And we need to be doing it in such a way that the fig leaves, the masks, come down. Hey, how are you? Great. How are you? Great. Okay, good. Have a nice piece of cake. See you later. And we can get into that sometime. We need each other. Believe me, there are people who are sitting in this room today who are super lonely, super isolated. And they may even feel like Elijah does. Want to go home today and cry out, Lord, just take me. I beg you, if you're in that situation, don't just walk out these doors today by yourself. And for everybody else, and maybe you feel you've got the friendships, you've got the community, I want you today, go look for that person. Don't let them leave to go home today to think to themselves, God, just take me, I'm all alone, I'm isolated. Go find them. That's what this is all about. It's about God bringing us back into the community we were meant for. And as the Church of Jesus Christ, although we have this very personal faith, we just got to work as a church to never allow that to become private for anyone. Do you agree with me? All right. After the service today, just let's stick around. Let's have a time of fellowship together, and let's just enjoy the blessing that God's given us with a group of people like this.